Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The next part of this little presentation is to show you a little of the origin of how this enterprise came about, and I mean enterprise. This idea came about after I did a movie called Don Quixote about 8 years ago, and Michael York, that's Michael York, did the voice of Don Quixote, and at the end, after he saw it, he said, what are you going to do next? And I said, either Cleopatra, Annie Oakley, or Joan of Arc. Obviously, I wanted a woman, powerful woman. And he goes, do Saint Joan. So I did. I first went to Domremy-la-Pucelle, which was a very small village where she was born and raised, where she saw her first visions, and where she passed her childhood and her adolescence till she was 17 years old. And it's a little town that we showed the first screening of this film we showed in that town about 5 weeks ago, which was a really kind of completing the cycle kind of a thing. It was really exciting. Lucas and I and Andia, who you'll meet later, got to go and show it there. It's a town of 94 people, but they have a very large and beautiful museum of Joan of Arc. This is Joan of Arc statue that's in Paris. I love some of these statues. There's millions of statues of Joan of Arc. That's in Paris at the Place de la Madeleine. That is a town called Chinon. And actually, you saw some of that in the illustrations that were in the middle. When she's going across enemy lines, there's a shot of the background that's very similar to that. I visited all these places. This is the original drawing that was done probably 9 years ago by Eugene, who you'll meet a little later. And Eugene also fabricated all these puppets. And this is the woman who I knew in southern France, and I took her picture because I wanted the face of Joan of Arc to look like her. This is my favorite sequence. Joan of Arc is an odd figure, half myth, half human. She's part of the French consciousness. She's an icon of the French people. You see the Rue Jeanne d'Arc in every town and city. Her story is about religion and politics, and about a young woman at the dawn of her adult life who, through a series of personal events, decides to risk her life to accomplish her goal of saving France from English rule. She began as a peasant roaming the fields. She was not fit to lead an army. She was not a soldier. She was only 17 years old. But it was an opportunistic moment for the officials of France, the noblemen from the House of Armagnac, to oppose the English who were trying to take over from the north to the south. This is the latter part of the 100 Years' War, and the English had already occupied the lands north of the Loire River. Orléans was the last holdout. And along comes this religious woman who hears voices of saints and angels. Her story bears retelling again and again and again. All the sets in the film were inspired by the real places. That's Rouen, Orléans, Domremy, and Chinon. That's Orléans. There are approximately 22 puppets made for this production, and they're all handmade by Russian-born puppet artist here in LA, Eugene Saragin, a master craftsman. They're made from wood. They're all his designs. He makes the entire puppet, the costume, the control. The amount of care and love that go into these characters is remarkable. This film would not be made without him. This woman's story is amazing. It's a cathartic story. She rises to great heights that few people ever reach or dream of reaching, and then she falls. It's so unusual, awe-inspiring, and a universal story.
I didn't really talk a lot about Steven's history as a puppeteer. I kind of wanted to start about that. You went off and you studied mime in France, and then you ended up staying there for a decade.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting.
J'ai commencé il y a très longtemps. Et j'étais en France, donc toute mon éducation artistique est en France.
In English.
I literally learned my artistic education was in France. So all my references are in French. All my references to how to create emotion. I wanted to be an elementary school teacher, but I kept having one more little job to do, and I ended up taking a workshop with Jim Henson. It was the only one he ever gave in his life. It was 3 weeks. It was a puppet institute in Charleville-Mézières. It's the only time he'd ever done anything like this before. And so I was coming from the theater world, which was the pure world. You know, we did real art, and TV was not that. It was the fake world where people made money and sold their souls. Yeah, I met Jim Henson, found out that he was this very angelic character and very, very deep, very incredibly enlightening character, and I got to hang out with him for 3 weeks, which was really something. And then I learned the craft of operating for a camera, which is very different than operating for a stage. And the first job I got was with Jean-Pierre Jeunet, which is why I got hired on Alien 4 when he came to the United States to do that for Fox, which is kind of, again, one of those interesting anecdotes that you never know what happens in your life. And the second job I got was in France, was on a TV show. I was the pioneering, actually there was 3 pilots done, and it was political satire, hardcore political satire. And they don't have the same libel laws we have here, so you could go really far. And my pilot wasn't picked, but since they don't have enough puppeteers, I was hired by the group that got picked to operate in the show. And I did 2 seasons, and then I came back to the United States. But that show went on for 28 years. It just canceled last year. Oh, wow. It just canceled last year. It was called Les Guignols de l'Info. Which was also kind of a funny coincidence. Had I known, I might not have left, but I'm glad I did. And then I came to the U.S. and started working with Jim Henson because I had known him. That was sort of my connection.
I was really intrigued by puppetry. I'm obviously a voiceover actor, and so the marriage of this art in my background and then meeting Steven and then seeing your wonderful, beautiful Joan. I met Joan. Steven said, "You have to meet Joan." I'm like, "What do you..." You got to come meet her to see if it's a good fit. All right. And then I met her and it was a good fit, and then we went steady. That's what happened.
I did so much research, it was really hard to decide to actually make a movie at the end of the day.
I remember the writing process was more like this. We'd get a script and we'd sit down, and then Steven would tell me all this history, and then it'd be like, well, so can we do, there's 5 battles or something. It's like, can we do 1? Can that work? And can we do all these things? Like, it would be something insane. Like, oh, and then she went here, and then she was questioned, and she's like, can she just go see the king now? And so there was a lot of that. Like, it's really hard to like really zip up a lot of this, stuff so we can get to the meat and potatoes of Joan, because it's a really, it's a relatively short film. But he did.
Yeah, that was a really tough process, because the more you know, the harder it is to summarize. At least I think it is, and it's all important, and it all has something to do with this mystique around this character of Joan of Arc.
Allow me to say one true thing. This one command has made lions from mice. Be brave, risk it all, and reap the rewards.